Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining me today. I'll be taking you through accessibility in design. As designers, we are the ones who dictate how the products will be designed, created, and how the different products feel, look, and how they can be able to be used by the final users. Therefore, we are the source and we need to establish accessibility right from where we start our designs. So today I'll be presenting on how you can just add a sprinkle of accessibility to your design and make a very huge difference. Before I continue, maybe I can just introduce myself. I'm Bethany Jepchumba, currently a cloud advocate at Microsoft for artificial intelligence and machine learning. I am also a freelance designer, but currently on break as I just resumed the role. And then in case you want to reach me, you can reach me out at Bethany Jep on any social media. Okay, thank you. So one of the things I like to quote whenever I'm talking about accessibility is this quote by Tim Berners-Lee, the creator of the World Wide Web, and he says the power of the web is in its universality, meaning everyone can be able to access the website regardless of wherever they are. So access by everyone, regardless of their disability, is very, very essential. Therefore, when you're designing, you should have at the back of your mind, thousands and thousands of people might actually view your design, view the final product. So how are you going to ensure everyone can be able to view it? Another thing I like to say is Euler's coming up with this presentation, I came across a very interesting fact by the World Health Organization, and it says, surprisingly, over 1 billion people are estimated to experience disability. This is about 15% of the world's population. So you can imagine about 190 people have 190 million people have some significant disabilities while they're accessing your different platforms. So how do you ensure when they come in, they're able to access your website? So before I go and dive into how us as designers can be able to add accessibility, maybe I should define what accessibility is. And I'll go with the Oxford Dictionary explanation, and it has 4 different meanings, each as important as the last. The first meaning is the quality of being able to be reached or entered. Secondly, the quality of being easy to obtain or use. Third, the quality of being easily understood or appreciated. And lastly is just an additional of everything. The quality of one, being able to be easily reached and entered. Secondly, being able to be easily obtained and used, and lastly, being able to be easily understood and appreciated by people who have a disability. So how are you accommodating all these people as they come into your designs? Before we dive into now, like, what are the steps you can take to ensure you add all these features from the beginning? I'll mention a few of the disabilities. The first one is mobility. Mobility involves the movement either by your hands, by your legs. So there's some people who cannot be able to move from one place to another easily, and they cannot also be able to type on your different devices. So how do you ensure they can be able to reach out to the different interfaces that you've created? For example, the woman on the right. The next one is visual. Visual is all about eyes being able to see, and this is close to my heart because once I remove my spectacles, I might have a struggle trying to read what exactly is in front of my screen. But once I put it on, I can be able to see clearly. But then sometimes, depending on now how great or how low your contrast is, it might also affect how I can be able to approach your designs. And then the other thing is cognitive. Cognitive is about the intellectual being. How easy is it for people to understand what you've written, regardless of their intellectual background and how they learn and develop? Also, an important thing to mention in cognitive is how are you using the things people are familiar with to represent things people are familiar with in the offline world to represent things in the digital world. And lastly, it's about auditory. Auditory is all about hearing, speaking, being able to hear from what people are saying. So some of the things that people use to help them in hearing is things like hearing aids. So how are you providing a way for them to be able to hear and understand what's being said, being able to understand everything? Okay, so the next thing is now diving into practical ways in which you can add accessibility to design. And I'll talk about one, a very important tool you can use. Secondly, I'll do two different designs and how you can be able to add accessibility as you're designing. And lastly, I'll show two different ways in which accessibility has been used in action. So let's start. The first thing I'll talk about is color contrast. So this is a keyword I have to define first before we go into the tools that we'll use to analyze whether there's good or bad color contrast. So color contrast is the difference between the darkness and the lightness of different surfaces. For example, you can see the green and the purple have different contrasts. So you can be able to tell apart like the different colors. Same to pink and the orange. For another example is now the text color that I have written here. You can be able to see clearly because I've written in white. Let's say, for example, I use a different color, something like blue or purple. The contrast will be low, so you may not be able to tell exactly what has been written. So according to the World Accessibility Guidelines, a contrast ratio of 4 by 5 by 1, 4.5 by 1 is advisable for like a normal text. So let's see which tool can help us to identify is our color contrast okay or not. And the tool we'll be using is the Adobe Contrast Checker. You can find it at https:/color.adobe.com. And this is how the website looks like. So once you go there, you can go directly to the accessibility tools. And with the accessibility tools, the first thing it will show you is a section like this. So you can see the text color here and the background color here. And then which level of accessibility you need, which tool you're using, and then it gives you the contrast ratio. And then at the end, on the far right, it gives you suggestions on how you can improve the contrast. So as you can see, the difference between the lightness and the darkness of the text and the background color is very, very small. It's a ratio of 3.29 by 1, which is very low. So you can push the slider a bit, and by pushing the slider, you can see some change. So yes, the contrast is now a bit better. People can be able to see it, but you also want to ensure it is actually very visible. This is the advised contrast ratio, but you can go to the extra mile and increase the colors all the way up to have a higher contrast ratio, something like 9.52 by 1. And the results are very impeccable. Anyone can read. So a high color contrast makes anything easier to read. The next thing I'll talk about is the additional of color plus something else to convey meanings. Most of the time, people who are colorblind may not be able to tell the difference between different colors. So adding things like in error messages, adding things like icons when you're designing to show, okay, this is an error, and also adding in text to tell people, okay, this is why this is an error, so that they can be able to understand what exactly you're talking about. The other thing is media captions and transcripts. This is very common in video services like when I'm doing this presentation, probably you'll see the captions at the bottom. When I'm doing something like when you're watching something like a movie on Netflix, you'll see the captions. And captions are very important for not only for people who are unable to hear what is being said, but also people who may not understand the language that is being spoken. And this is an example. So this is a design I did a while back, and you can see probably if the movie was playing, people who are deaf might not be able to understand what's going on. But once you click on the closed captions, you can see, yeah, you can now get a glimpse of what exactly is happening in the picture. And then the last part is how do you now see this accessibility in action. First part is alternative text. Alternative text is a written image description in place of images. This is not only useful to the screen reader when it's reading out loud, but also to people who have low or unstable internet connection. You can be able to tell what the images stand for before the image loads. For example, in our case, I used PowerPoint to generate an alt text for me, and you can see it's very clever. In one of my previous images, I already described this. This is a lady. She's looking at the other side, seated on a wheelchair, and I auto-generated the description and gave me a person sitting in a wheelchair. You can go ahead and modify your description. Add things like this is an old lady or something of that sort sitting in a wheelchair. Then you can see something like facing towards the window to make your description a bit better. So alt text is very important, especially so when you're posting things on social media. I think you've noticed there's also the provision of adding a description of what exactly is there. It's very useful to also include that in our designs. Lastly, I'll talk about transcriptions from speech to text. And this is an example of a common tool we use, that is Microsoft Word. And I'll play the video. I was doing this earlier, whereby I clicked on the dictate and told it that, hello, I am Bethany Jepchumba, and I'm doing a presentation on accessibility on the web. So this is the result. Hello, my name is Bethany, and I'm presenting on accessibility in design. Very useful, even like if you come up with an idea and you can't type too fast, you just say it out loud and there goes the writing. So this is also a very useful feature. The last thing I'll probably mention is empathy. As I come to the end, is when you're designing, you should design with the end users in mind. Put yourself in your user's shoes and imagine, what if this person cannot be able to properly tell the difference between colors? What extra step can I go and ensure they can be able to see it? Another thing is also use the tools, the different accessibility tools accessible to you at your disposal. So something like being able to just use a screen reader once in a while to check if your page is accessible. That is also very useful. And lastly, I'll go back to the topic, to the quote that I started with. The power of the web is in its universality, meaning access to everyone, regardless of whether they're disabled or not, whether they have bad internet connection or not, whether they are from your country or not. Just being able to ensure anyone, even the 1 billion people in the world who are disabled, can access your website. Thank you so much for joining me. And the last step, of course, is sharing resources whereby you can go and explore and learn more about this. I'm sure you're intrigued. The first resource is the Accessibility Fundamentals Overview by the Web Accessibility Initiative. So you can find it at www.w3.org/WAI/fundamentals. So that's where you can go and read and review more on now accessibility. The second resource is a course on Microsoft Learn. So it's a learning path on different areas around accessibility. You can get it at aka.ms/Codelearn Accessibility. And lastly, how to use the Adobe Contrast Analyzer. Find it at color.adobe.com/create/color-contrast-analyzer. Here you'll get to play around with the tool, get to see whether your all designs actually align with the color contrast ratio, if it's actually good, or people are actually struggling to see what you're presenting. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you learned a lot. You can find me on the internet using at Bethany Jep, and yeah, we can continue the conversation from there. Thank you so much.